1998, Volkswagen Group paid 430 million British pounds to acquire Rolls-Royce Motors, gaining the factory in Crewe, England, where every Rolls-Royce had been built since 1946, gaining the workforce of thousands of skilled craftspeople who had dedicated careers to building the most refined automobiles on Earth, gaining the tooling and the production infrastructure and the supplier relationships and the order book and the cars in production, and gaining the Bentley brand, which had been part of Rolls-Royce Motors since 1931. And Volkswagen Group paid 430 million pounds and did not own the rights to call the cars they had just bought Rolls-Royce, because the name Rolls-Royce, the trademark that gives every single thing Volkswagen had just bought its value, belonged to a completely different company. A company that made jet engines and airplane components, that had no connection to Volkswagen's acquisition, that had simply never been part of the transaction. And BMW, Volkswagen's rival, watching the acquisition complete from the outside, paid 40 million pounds for just the name, and walked away with the most iconic automotive brand on earth, while Volkswagen held a factory full of cars they could not legally call by the name painted on their radiator grills. Today, I'm going to decode the most expensive oversight in corporate history, the greatest brand acquisition heist in the history of the automobile industry, and the story of how two companies paid 430 million and 40 million pounds respectively for the same thing, and the one that paid less got more. The two Rolls-Royces that nobody kept separate. Here's the legal and corporate structure that made the entire situation possible, and that most people who follow the automotive industry have never thought about clearly. Rolls-Royce is not one company. It is two. Rolls-Royce Motors Limited, the company that designed, built, and sold the automobiles bearing the Rolls-Royce name, was owned by Vickers plc, a British engineering and defense conglomerate, and had been since 1980. Rolls-Royce plc, the company that designs and manufactures jet engines, turbines, and aerospace components, is a completely separate listed company that happens to share the same brand name and heritage, but operates in an entirely different industry with entirely different ownership. The Rolls-Royce name, the Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament, the Pantheon grille trademark, and every other element of the Rolls-Royce brand identity were owned not by Rolls-Royce Motors and not by Vickers plc, but by Rolls-Royce plc, the jet engine company, as part of a licensing arrangement that allowed Rolls-Royce Motors to use the Rolls-Royce name on its automobiles. And when Vickers plc decided in 1997 to sell Rolls-Royce Motors, the selling price reflected the factory, the workforce, the cars, and the Bentley brand, but the Rolls-Royce name itself was not Vickers plc's to sell. And the bidders who did not understand this distinction paid the price of that misunderstanding. The acquisition battle economics that should have been the end of the story. Here is how the bidding for Rolls-Royce Motors in 1998 unfolded, and where the first critical error in the most expensive brand oversight in automotive history was made. BMW and Volkswagen Group were both actively bidding for the Rolls-Royce Motors business. BMW had a particular strategic interest because it was already supplying the V8 and V12 engines that powered several Rolls-Royce and Bentley models, giving BMW not just commercial interest in the outcome of the sale, but operational leverage over the acquired business that any owner without BMW as an engine supplier would immediately face. Volkswagen Group launched an aggressive bid that ultimately reached 430 million pounds, significantly above any other offer, and Vickers plc accepted. Volkswagen Group had acquired Rolls-Royce Motors, and believed it had acquired the Rolls-Royce brand, and in the celebration of a successful acquisition, appears to have not fully examined who actually owned the most important single asset of the company it had just bought. The trademark that turned a factory and Crewe into 430 million pounds worth of value. The BMW countermove that changed everything. Here is a sequence of events that represents one of the most elegant and ruthless competitive maneuvers in the history of corporate acquisition. And that turned a losing bid into a victory worth billions of pounds more than the winning price. BW's acquisition team, in reviewing the structure of the Rolls-Royce Motors business as part of their due diligence on the bid they had lost, identified something that Volkswagen's team appears to have overlooked. The Rolls-Royce trademark was not owned by Vickers plc, and therefore was not included in the transaction that Volkswagen had won. The trademark was owned by Rolls-Royce plc, the jet engine company, and Rolls-Royce plc had no obligation to license the trademark to whoever owned Rolls-Royce Motors. It was a separate commercial negotiation entirely. BMW approached Rolls-Royce plc directly and quietly, and negotiated a purchase of the Rolls-Royce name, trademark, and the Spirit of Ecstasy hood, ornament trademark, for £40 million, approximately 1/11th of what Volkswagen had paid for the physical company. And in doing so, BMW acquired the legal right to produce and sell automobiles under the Rolls-Royce name, while Volkswagen was left holding a factory and crew, a workforce, and tooling for cars they could not legally badge as Rolls-Royce, the engine leverage that completed the coup. Here is the second layer of BMW's strategic advantage that made Volkswagen's position even more difficult. BMW was the supplier of the V12 engine used in the Rolls-Royce Silver Seraph and the Bentley Arnage, the two most important models that Rolls-Royce Motors was producing at the time of the acquisition. And as a legal holder of the Rolls-Royce trademark from the moment their deal with Rolls-Royce plc was completed, BMW was in a position to threaten withdrawal of the engine supply, which would have made continued production of the acquired models impossible. The combination of trademark ownership and engine supply control gave BMW leverage over a company it had supposedly lost the bidding war for. That was almost impossible for Volkswagen to overcome through conventional commercial means, the negotiated resolution that determined the outcome for both companies for the next century. Here's the agreement that eventually resolved the standoff between Volkswagen and BMW, and that turned the most expensive brand oversight in automotive history into an outcome that, while deeply frustrating for Volkswagen's negotiating team, gave both companies valuable and distinct properties from a single transaction. BMW agreed to continue engine supply to the Crewe factory until January 2003, giving Volkswagen time to develop alternative powertrains. In exchange, Volkswagen acknowledged BMW's ownership of the Rolls-Royce trademark and agreed to cease use of the Rolls-Royce name on its vehicles from January 1st, 2003. The assets were effectively divided between the two competing bidders. Volkswagen retained everything physical, the Crewe factory, the tooling, the workforce, the Bentley brand, and the Silver Spur and Bentley models. BMW received the Rolls-Royce name and hood ornament, and the right to build a new Rolls-Royce factory wherever it chose and staff it however it wished. The Volkswagen outcome that turned defeat into dynasty. Here is where the story becomes more complex and more interesting than a simple narrative of VW losing and BMW winning, what Volkswagen retained from the transaction. While deeply humiliating in the context of having paid £430 million and not received the name they had paid for, was the foundation of a business that under Volkswagen's investment and management has become one of the most consistently successful luxury automotive brands in the world. The Bentley brand, which many industry observers in 1998 considered the consolation prize of the transaction, has been transformed under Volkswagen Group's ownership into a business generating approximately €3.4 billion in annual revenue, with operating margins that at peak approach the financial performance of the best luxury goods companies in any category. And the Bentley Bentayga SUV, introduced in 2016 and expanded in subsequent variants, has made Bentley accessible to a broader demographic of ultra-high net worth buyers than any previous Bentley product, driving the volume and revenue growth that has made the Crewe factory more productive and more profitable than at any point in its 78-year history. The BMW Outcome that became the greatest automotive investment in history. Here is the financial return that BMW has generated on the £40 million investment in the Rolls-Royce trademark, and that represents the most favorable return on brand investment in the history of the automobile industry. BMW built a new factory at Goodwood in West Sussex, purpose-designed for the production of the new generation of Rolls-Royce automobiles under BMW ownership, at a construction cost of approximately £40 million, and launched the first BMW-era Rolls-Royce, the Phantom, in 2003. The brand that BMW acquired for £40 million in 1998, that is now estimated by brand valuation consultancies at between 7 and 10 billion pounds, that generates approximately 6.2 billion pounds in annual revenue, and that sells approximately 6,000 of the most expensive production cars in the world each year, represents a return of approximately 17,500 to 25,000% on BMW's £40 million investment, making it one of the greatest brand acquisitions in the history of any industry in the world, not just the automotive industry. Here is the complete economic verdict on the most expensive oversight in corporate automotive history. Volkswagen paid £430 million for the physical assets of Rolls-Royce Motors, and got Bentley, which is now worth approximately 4 to 5 billion pounds, a return of approximately 10 times their investment over 25 years. BMW paid 40 million pounds for the name that those physical assets depended on for their identity, and got Rolls-Royce, which is now worth approximately 7 to 10 billion pounds, a return of approximately 17,500 to 25,000% on their investment. Volkswagen made a good acquisition and turned it into a dynasty. BMW made a brilliant acquisition and turned it into a legend. And the difference between the two outcomes, the 17,000% versus a 10 times return, was not superior capital, not superior resources, not superior strategy in any conventional sense. It was simply one team of lawyers reading a contract more carefully than the other team did, and understanding that in the acquisition of a company whose primary asset is its name, owning the factory without the name is worth less than owning the name without the factory. Jake reads about this story for the first time and understands why the most important due diligence question in any acquisition is not how much is this company worth, but what exactly am I buying? You have been decoded. If this story made you think about the economics of brand acquisition, intellectual property, and corporate negotiation differently than you have ever thought about them before, subscribe to Money Decoder 3004 every single week. We decode the economic events and corporate decisions that shape the world of business and luxury that most people experience without ever understanding. Simply, honestly, and clearly. Drop a comment below. Do you think Volkswagen won or lost in the long run, knowing that Bentley is now worth 4 to 5 billion pounds? Tell me your analysis below. I read every single comment, and I will see you in the next decode.